2020. Our planet's on fire, and so are streets. Gas, rubber bullets, crowd control. Now here too. The injustice. The injustice looks like heat made in the north scorching the south. The injustice looks like trash of the continents sinking into the deepest ocean. The injustice looks like the ones who stole most walking away free, while the ones whose lives were robbed are being jailed. The injustice looks like we, the default, the here, the center, and they, the other, the there, the periphery. The injustice looks like we, the consumer, they, the source. Oh, how unsurprising. Few of us listen, so few of us hear. Ain't no such thing as sustainable growth in the world of finite resources. The dirty secret of the Church of Exponential Tech is exponential extinction of language and species. Utopian dreams, colonials they have always been. Exclude. Dystopia, no more cautioned tale, but product roadmap in desperacy. Hope. We need hope. We starve for it. And yet, where are the future stories speaking of hope? Can we try to whisper that together? Protopia. Protopia is a notebook of dreams. A continuous process of learning and unlearning. The meeting of histories before the erasure and futures past it. An attempt for a different blueprint. In the margins, beyond the binary, exists a possibility space to imagine and act. Celebrate life, not things. Co-create, not exploit. Grow, not just build. You see, there's no such thing as man and the world. And the exhausted, I think, therefore I am, is yet another delusion of the millennia-old separation. Honor the wound, for it is as deep as this separation. Human peoples are peoples among peoples, in the world and of the world and permeated by it. There is no you nor me as disentangled from the existence of each other, and everything that birthed us, and everything that sustains us. The life of the rock, of a tree, and all the invisible things, and you and me, bound together. I am, because you are, human, because we share, participate, belong. The work of caring is the work of the future. Symbiosis, radical, tenderness.
Good morning, everybody. I'd love to take you on a journey through the kind of futures that have been, as imagined by those who saw the world as a mere few eggs to break to achieve their grand civilizational dreams. And the kind of futures that could be if we become just a little more curious of those that have experienced being those eggs for the breaking, and who know that we should not be justifying collateral damage, and that we could approach futures not as there for the breaking, but for tending, nourishing, growing, as if we would a cherished garden, or even better, a beloved forest. But to start with, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Who of you know the work of Walt Disney? Lift your hands, please. Everybody, I see. Okay, the second question, maybe a little less obvious. Who of you know the work of Wernher von Braun? Lift your hands, please. Maybe 10%, maybe a bit less. Okay, so let me tell you stories of a few men that have influenced our imaginations of the future. Wernher von Braun was a peer, friend, advisor to Walt Disney that has been profoundly influential towards the kind of sci-fi visions that are domineering to this day our screens and our future imaginations. But who was Wernher von Braun before he became an illustrious NASA scientist and the face for the future of space exploration? He was a member of SS, working in Nazi Germany on the V-2 rockets, utilizing the slave labor of the Camp Dora for his dream of spatial colonization and destruction that it ended up bringing to the world. The cost of it represented 20,000 lives of people, which in fact was more than even those rockets succeeded in killing when they bombed London. He was brought in to the United States of America through Operation Paperclip. And his visions of the future, rooted in the kind of culture that he observed going into his workplace every day, past all of those people, is something that trickles down into our imaginations of the present moment. I also want to tell you a story of another man, another few men, Joshua Handelman. He was a businessman in Canada who owned one of the largest Canada's chiropractic practices and belonged to a technocrat party. He decided to move to South Africa, not despite apartheid regime, but for it, as he readily embraced racist and anti-Semitic theories. He also, now I'm just theorizing, might have read Wernher von Braun's book, Project Mars, that was written in 1949, and imagine a future civilization on Mars ruled by 10 technocrats, overseen by the grand philosopher king named, wait for it, Elon. Joshua was Elon Musk's grandfather. Fast forward into the time of Elon moving to the United States of America with a few emeralds in the pocket from a stolen mine that belonged to his father Errol in, back then, Rhodesia. Fast forward to the pandemic moment, when Elon too had grand dreams of colonizing Mars, or maybe, just maybe, mining the asteroid belt that could increase his fortune still by the orders of magnitude. We had a novel pathogen ravaging the entire planet that could have unforeseen consequences to his many workers in SpaceX factories. Now he wouldn't want to delay his civilizational dream for such a small thing as a grave danger to the lives of his workers. Those who possess the imagination possess the future. But what that imagination is grounded in, and what are we willing to overlook when we justify grand future dreams? We're suffering from a crisis of imagination, which is represented by the binary of dystopia and utopia, that are top-down visions and the end states that deny our ability to engage with it. Dystopia is the vision of doom and gloom that actually leads to despair escapism. If we feel that the future is doomed and we can do nothing about it, then why would we do anything? But also, and more dangerously, it actually becomes a product roadmap for people that see that there's money to be made, not just while the world burns, but potentially also setting the world on fire. So utopia continues being presented to us as a kind of answer, as a kind of antidote to despairism and dystopianism. I like to position that it's not an opposite, let alone an antidote, but just another side of the same coin to dystopianism. It is perfectly illustrated by the fact that Hollywood's dystopian visions end up on the VC pitch decks for techno-utopianism. Utopias have always been exclusionary and eugenic by default. Why so many people of marginalized backgrounds still relate more to dystopian visions? Because most of us would never be represented in utopia. If a disabled person still exists, is it even utopia? The truth is that every historical utopia was someone's dystopia. A utopia for Wernher von Braun was a dystopia for people that worked in the labor camps. A utopia for the colonizers of the Americas was a dystopia for the people being enslaved and people being genocided. A utopia for the leaders of the Communist Party in Soviet Union was a dystopia for almost everybody else that inhabited it. It required one of the largest environmental crimes of human history, mass campaigns of ethnic cleansing, indigenous genocide, looking at disability as something that also needs to be eliminated, because in Soviet Union everybody needed to be productive. And of course, gay people also did not exist in Soviet Union, and the few that did were sent to the gulags. So maybe we need to move away from such binary, or maybe we also need to start looking at the utopian visions, be they political or technological, that are being presented to us, and scratch just a little bit more beneath the surface to understand whose work and lives and blood and bones it's built upon. I want to illustrate that in the present moment with an emergent new form of technological theology being embraced by some of the most important people within the tech world. And it's a strange acronym called TESCREAL. What I mean by eschatological tech theology, aka tech rapture. Eschatological because it also presents this end state, the end of the world as we know it, as transcended by technological means. And it reproduces the same tropes of Christian ascensionism that sees all earthly life, our bodies and this planet, and everybody, including non-human animals that inhabit it, as something that is lowly and needs to be transcended. Everything that is body related, everything that is soil related, everything that is life related needs to be transcended in favor of technological development in the science fiction-y heaven. So TESCREAL stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, irrationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Let me go a little bit into what every of these means. Transhumanism is a sort of backbone of the entire ideology, this, again, emergent new form of technological religion. It positions that our mission is to transcend the slowly biological life form and to augment ourselves through technological means to live into eternity and across space-time. Dystopianism was the original message board where this ideology coalesced, where some of the most privileged people in the world were discussing how their lives should be extended radically or all the way into living forever. Singularitarianism was pioneered by Ray Kurzweil, who said that technological, aka AI singularity, is inevitable. At some point, AI is going to reach this intelligence explosion that will render human minds, let alone any other minds on this planet, utterly obsolete. Cosmos is taking that further and utilizing the newly evolved capacity of technological singularity to colonize the entire cosmos and start manipulating the space-time. Rationalism is this idea that not just everything could be rationalized, but in fact should be rationalized to a point of optimizing away our very humanity. Effective altruism is taking this idea into the realm of morality and decision-making by the few for the many. It's another word for philanthrocapitalism and trickle-down economics that puts people already in the positions of extreme power to decide what matters to all of us. It justified things such as going and working for an oil company so that you could make the greatest amount of money that you could then reinvest into the causes of your liking. Now, what it does, it never addresses the root issues of inequity. And long-termism is really kind of the final, most science fiction-y vision of that. It's the very opposite of long-term thinking. It's the so long-term thinking that it imagines that anything that endangers the vision of long-termists of our lives billions and billions of years in the future as digital simulations that have colonized the entire universe and created, I don't know where they got that number out, 10 times 58, that is 10 with 58 zeros of simulated lives, is the most important thing we should focus on. Anything that interferes with that should be dealt with. It's an utter distraction from the kind of issues that we actually face. It's a science fiction fantasy that might seem ridiculous, except that incredibly powerful people believe that, fund that, or at the very least use that as a smokescreen for their usual profiteering. I'll illustrate that with example of yet another man of the future, Mark Andreessen, who in his biography a little while back identified himself as tictus realist, cyberpunk activist, AI accelerationist. Let it rip. Again, it's about breaking things, accelerating things to the level of impassibility and trying to bring a cyberpunk future. How many of us would actually like to inhabit that kind of world? Sure, it maybe looks nice on a screen, but would we actually be able to live in there? These people position that the issues created with technology could be solved with more technology. Now, I think we clearly know that nothing could be further from the truth. If the problem is social, cultural, political, the solution needs to be two. AI, XR, metaverse, VR is not a panacea, but nor are psychedelics, which is seen as another technological frontier for these people to profiteer from. In fact, their very example illustrates how those things aren't solutions, but actually non-specific amplifiers. What do I mean by that? they amplify existing tendencies, existing desires, existing perspectives. So if the people have a vision that is profoundly discriminatory and authoritarian, inspired by the science fiction dreams, when they go and take acid together on the playa Burning Man, it really makes them think that they will be the ones to bring it on to the rest of the ignorant world. I'll read a quote from Mark Andreessen, brought together with a quote of one of his idols, Marinetti, who was the author of a futurist manifesto, but also fascist manifesto, all the way back in Mussolini's Italy. It's been almost 100 years, and very few things have changed. We have to persecute, whip, torture all who sin against speed. Technology is the glory of human ambition and achievement, the spearhead of progress and the realization of our potential. We believe any deceleration of AI will cost lives. Deaths that were preventable by the AI that was prevented from existing is a form of murder. These are the things that are being espoused from 100 years to the present moment. The vision of Marinetti's, where he was disgusted by a river Danube, full of its, I'm quoting, fat, libidinous, fecund fish, and dreamed of making it run in a straight line at 300 miles an hour. We still live in these people's imagination. And maybe it's about time we should start challenging that. Ends should never justify the means. Accelerationists see all of us as expendable. Accelerationism, both in technological utopias and in left accelerationism, aka communist accelerationism, really sees that if we have a grand civilizational dream, whoever that interferes with that could actually be those eggs that would break for the omelet. It never leads us to a good place. And whenever we think that we can integrate those systems and somehow change them from within, and do not analyze what is the root of them, we participate in predatory inclusion. And that's just another tactic for distraction and extraction. It doesn't end up changing things. It just ends up tokenizing our participation. So, I hope I scared you enough and put you on the edge of your seat. What do we actually do to make things different? Well, first, we have to push back on nostalgia, but also refuse techno-solutionism. To think that things have been so great in the past, that we start seeing past not for what it was, as a complex reality that had always harmed somebody. And we just try to bring it back in the shape of Make America Great Again or any other version. We stop learning from history, and those lessons are valuable. But when we just embrace technology as a magical solution that will fix things and do not address the fundamental causes of what brought us to present day, we actually just perpetuate the harm. Technological innovation that is not led by humanitarian evolution always leads to oppressive future. Be it dystopian or utopian, I hope by now that you started seeing that they're not opposites, but just representation of more of the same. To be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination, our concrete reality, while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. We need to learn from historical patterns. We need to understand them, because that is the only way how we will learn how to break them. We need to challenge this idea that status quo is the only thing that is available to us, and imagine the possibilities that could be different. Informed hope is always better than techno-billionaire optimism. Informed hope is knowing that something is worth living and working for, and then doing it. Not because it is easy, but because it needs to be done. Not because we just hope somebody will do it for us, a kind of superhuman, the Mark Andreessen's Übermensch, or the superheroes of Hollywood will come and just solve it all for us. They won't. But not just also magically fantasizing that we could leapfrog the issues of the present day. Informed hope is a very potent weapon, but not something that we should die for or kill for, but something that we should live for. So a positive equation that I've been working on of protopian futures, aka livable future. Something that is maybe not perfect, definitely not an end state, not a final state, but rather a process. Something to be constantly reiterated, questioned, updated, expanded, is humanitarian evolution plus innovative tools. Science and technology simply as something that we use, not in the driver's seat, but in the back seat. We humans, we humanity, we the community are the drivers. So what are the principles that we could be thinking about to hopefully walk a little bit closer towards livable future? I don't want you to think of them as a kind of hierarchical pyramid of human needs as we've been indoctrinated into with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but rather as interconnected circles that need to be thought, considered, and worked upon all at the same time simultaneously and also as in supporting each other. So plurality, beyond binaries. Tolerance is not enough. We need to start embracing our true plurality. The problems that we face are of truly planetary scale, and it will take all of us with a multiplicity of our cultural perspectives, lived experience, industry expertise to actually attempt to deal with that. Instead of always wanting to stay within our pre-existing position and be right, what we need to start embracing is the process of learning. Next one is interdependence beyond the borders. I think pandemic has really proved to all of us that we live in an interconnected world and no walls can be built to the virus. And so instead of continuing to perpetuate this delusion of independence as the most aspirational goal, we need to recognize what indigenous people and disabled people have always been sharing with us. We are always interdependent. Each of us, in a way, is born disabled, in need of other people's support. And unless we die a sudden death, we will experience disability at any given moment of our lives. It will not come necessarily announced. And so we need to create these support systems between humans where we strive, where we make interdependence aspirational rather than not needing each other. But also, indigenous justice movements teach us that we need each other as human and non-human animals. We are codependent with the world. About 30 trillion of cells within our bodies are ours, yes. But almost 40 trillion cells are of the microorganisms that inhabit us, that we exchange with every day when we talk, when we greet, when we touch, when we hug each other, but also with the rest of life. And we can only be healthy if we live in a healthy environment, if we engage with a rich living world, to consider that we could just eject ourselves into space and live in the tin cans as disconnected from this planet, could we still survive? Questionable, but definitely not as humans. So with that, what I invite you is to also embrace embodiment, joy, pleasure. We should not accept technologies that isolate us, not just from each other as humans, but from our very own bodies and embodied experience, and from the rest of the living world. When people preach the cyborgized futures, in a way it makes sense to render this planet unlivable. Because of course, it will be easier to motivate people to then upload themselves in the metaverse, theoretical as that claim is. But if we enjoy the feeling of the grass under our feet, of holding the hand of our loved one, of feeling the ocean water upon our skin, maybe we will question these ideas that all of that needs to be rendered obsolete. So pleasure is so very important. Let's embrace the kind of technologies that allow us to be more together rather than apart. Which of course leads us to biosphere regeneration. Sustainability is clearly so not enough. So much damage has been done, we need to repair it. In order to do that, we need to move away from thinking that technology is the most advanced thing that there is and start seeing life itself as technology. The most advanced robotics, the most advanced material science to the present day exists in the living world. And why? Because the living world does not look at anything as resources that should be converted into waste, but exists in a system of circularity, and we need to start learning from that. Creative flourishment and spiritual fulfillment, the points that get continuously overlooked, and yet we know that one of the first things that both fascist and communist regimes do when they rise to power is try to eliminate any creative expression that challenges them. In fact, when we face almost unsurmountable difficulties that are especially political in nature, what helps us to imagine the ways to overcome that is our creative imagination. We humans are creative animals. Not just when we are children and we have this desire to play, but all out through our adulthood as well. Play is important. And so is spiritual fulfillment. Spiritual rituals and practice is something that helps us reckon with our very mortality and mortality of our loved ones. Instead of pushing that away and thinking that we somehow will be able to live forever with the digital versions of our loved ones, what we need to start thinking is what kind of spirituality we need in the future that maybe would move away from a current state of religious dogma that otherizes and excludes, but helps us to come together and reckon with complexity of this living world. Which leads me to the last point that is in a way a joining point, evolved values. If you want to imagine a world of plurality, of interdependence, of embodiment, of biosphere regeneration, creative flourishment, spiritual fulfillment, well, what are the values that underlie all that? What do we consider aspirational? What do we consider despicable in such a world? And how do we start telling those stories? One of the most important aspects to incorporate if we are not to reproduce these eugenic exclusionary tropes of utopia is to center indigenous, queer, disabled, and neurodivergent perspectives. Not as some kind of charity work, but actually as something that could help make future kinder and more compassionate to all of us. I've given you example of disability and why disability inclusive future makes a more accessible future for all of us. Why disability informed design consistently has resulted in more inclusive innovation for all of us, a kind of innovation that benefits all of us, as if compared with a track record of innovation motivated by police state and military industrial complex. And indigenous people, of course, they're the ones living at the bleeding edge of harm of biosphere collapse. And so they are that litmus test. If we can make the world livable for them, where they could still sustain their traditions and their rituals, then maybe climate impact will not reach our shores as fast as it's reaching right now. So why do we mechanomorphize the living world while anthropomorphizing AI and aliens? Why the people that are so obsessed with theorizing AI consciousness and alien consciousness are not curious at all about what kind of consciousness besides human consciousness exists here on this planet? Ed Yong writes in his brilliant new book, Immense World, as we desecrate sensory environments, we become accustomed to the results. As we push animals away, we get used to their absence. How do we solve a problem we don't even realize exists? We are destroying so much of the world before we even know what's in there. So few of us have been in the deep ocean, and yet the microplastics have already reached the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. How don't we realize how we are losing our very sensory capacities, our ability to taste, smell, touch, because of how removed we are becoming from the living world? With every language, with every creature that vanishes, we lose a way of making sense of the world. Every indigenous language offers to us a different way of seeing this planet that we live on. And every creature is not just its DNA that we could someday hope to recreate or make XR simulations of. Every creature has a different way of experiencing this planet. And yet, we're destroying all of them before we even have the curiosity to understand what we could learn from them. Not that we should stop space exploration, but maybe we should put a higher question mark on space colonialism and space extractivism that could just amplify the harms that we've already experienced with a similar approach here on this planet. We already live in an immense world, but here on Earth. Between humans that are so unlike us, that have so much to teach us, and between the rest of life that we should finally become curious of. How do we think today in the present scientific reality that it's still only us that will transcend into eternal heavens? I mean, it's the same Christian idea that only humans go to paradise. How do we think that it's only us that have a language when we know animals have complex societies and engage in complex tasks? Why don't we think, how do they communicate and understand each other? We live in an immense world here on Earth. Let's become curious of it. Let's also understand that Earth, differently than what Buckminster Fuller said, is not a spaceship. It cannot be reduced to zeros and ones or engineered to its separate parts. And we're not even on this spaceship. We are off this planet. We are part of it. And we will only survive if we'll start acting as if that is true. Earth is a complex living ecosystem, ever evolving, ever changing. And our very humanity is inexorably linked with it through our evolutionary history, but also through our microbiome. We need it more than it needs us. We have to defy escapist fantasies that there's always another frontier to go, destroy, and extract. Instead of letting it rip, instead of moving fast and breaking things, can we move tenderly? Stop breaking things, people, planet. In order to do that, yes, we need a humanitarian evolution to lead the way. But fundamentally, it cannot just be about us. We need to, of course, move away from just user-centric design. Humans aren't just users. But we also need to move away from human-centric to life-centric design. And I'm not talking about eco-fascist ideas of post-humanism, humans are the virus, we should just move away and let the planet live. But actually, if we want to live here on this earth long-term, we need to start centering life because we are codependent with it. When we design our technologies, when we design our cities, when we design our lived spaces, when we design our hospitals, we need to start designing for everybody that will be inhabiting those spaces, not just human. And this is what will actually help humans. We have a choice. Eremocene versus Symbiocene. Eremocene is the coming age post-Anthropocene. This idea of existential loneliness that will arrive after having calamitously extinguishing all other species. Or Symbiocene, an age where we finally learn how to coexist, cohabit, and support each other. And fundamentally, this is a choice between extractive versus regenerative politics. I think we need to start retiring these ideas of conservative, progressive, left and right. Just like Utopia and Dystopia, they have so much baggage. And sometimes people are resistant to be associated with those framings just because of the baggage that carries. And I think this political binary, this design binary, is really, really helpful. Because if I ask you, do you want to live in a future that is extractive or regenerative? Do you think we can live in a future that continues being extractive or regenerative? I think the answer is clear to most of us. A peer and a colleague of mine, Donnie McClurkin, illustrates that perfectly. He's worked with people from around the world, across the political spectrum, geographies, ethnic backgrounds, social groups. And he asks people to imagine a kind of world, a kind of future that would be good to live in. And consistently, across all of these differences, people end up drawing 4 basic shapes that illustrate that. A circle, a heart, infinity sign, or a spiral. Despite all of these differences. And when he asks those very same people to draw a depiction of the world that we currently live in, they draw an iteration of either arrow or a bunch of scratched lines. So clearly we all know that the system doesn't work. But clearly we also have that baggage of the traumas of our ancestors. And yet we need to unite, not just despite that, but also for that. And I think extractivism versus regenerative approach really helps us to see things a little bit more clearly. We are in this together. We want it or not. But we're not on the same boat. Some of us have yachts. Some of us barely have life jackets. And future is shaped not just by our actions, but also by our apathy. Within indigenous cultural framing, the one that has the most power is not the one that has an unquestionable right to possess, extract, exploit, abuse. It is the one that has the greatest amount of responsibility and duty. So we need to start thinking not just what we engage with, but what and whom we disengage from. We all do our small little thing, and the challenges we face might seem daunting, and yet we all do that small little thing that contributes to a bigger whole. So can we imagine better the kind of whole that we're contributing with, and do whatever we can do with what we do towards livable future? I won't lie, these last weeks have been really hard to prepare these talks. Just like when Russia invaded Ukraine, I've been glued to the screen, like many of us, and especially those that are closely affected by either our family associations, historical trauma, or friends and loved ones. What we have today is voices that are being manipulated to scream into a greater and greater extremity. That is all but the very opposite of working towards peace. And I know that peace seems something so unattainable. Cohabitation and coexistence with those unlike us seems so unattainable. It seems utopian, right? But as my friend Jenka Gurfinkel says, peace isn't some final destination utopia. Peace is maybe the most protopian thing we could do. Peace is work, peace is cultivation, peace is stewardship, peace is negotiation. It is tedious and it is laborious. It is not some silly, unsophisticated, privileged fantasy. In fact, fantasizing that we could just burn it all down like accelerations proposes, that is a privileged fantasy, because we think that war zone will not reach us. But guess what? It will. So we need to start seeing how we work not towards just stopping the damage, becoming sustainable and moderating the impact of what we currently do. Not just stopping the active fighting and announcing a ceasefire, but also acknowledging the deep wounds that we carry as society, that we carry as the world. And the only way to assure peace long-term is to keep working on it, is to keep understanding the kind of trauma we carry within ourselves, the kind of trauma that is carried by those that are not like us, and work to repair it, work to redress it, work to regenerate it. The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it's something that we make, and we could just easily make differently. When anybody tells you that something is inevitable and the only way that it could be, show them that it isn't. Thank you.